4, Chapter 5. Can you believe it? Welcome to the Henry George Day Devotional, episode 54. And look at this. The problem solved. We are in book 4, Effective Material Progress, Model Distribution of Wealth. We are beginning this book 5, the problem. Oh, yeah, we are. Wait, no. I apologize. Maybe I need to restart the stream. Um, oh no, I'm right, yes. We were book 4, chapter 4 last time. And yeah, we have reached the book 5. The problem solved. Chapter 1, the primary cause of recurring paroxysms of industrial depression. Chapter 2, the persistence of poverty amid advancing wealth. Okay, so I guess by problem solved he means we have figured out what is causing the depressions. He has yet to provide us with what will fix the depression. So there was the problem of what causes poverty along with progress. And then there's another problem, which is how do we fix it? Which, what good is figuring out what the problem is if you can't fix it? Alright, he has a quote here. To whomsoever the soil at any time belongs, to him belong the fruits of it. White parasols and elephants mad with pride are the flowers of a grant of land. Sir William Jones' translation of an Indian grant of land found at Tana. It's an island in southern Vanuatu. Okay. The widow is gathering nettles for her children's dinner. A perfumed signor, delicately lounging by the Isle de Boeuf, both an alchemy whereby he will extract from her the third nettle and call it rent. I assume the Isle de Boeuf is like some luxurious place, I guess. Taking the poor old lady's nettle. Alright. Chapter 1, the primary cause of recurrent paroxysms of industrial depression. Our long inquiry is ended. We may now marshal the results. Spoiler alert though, yours and mine's daily devotionals are not ended. We have quite some ways to go. And George's time is still long lasting. I don't know. To begin with the industrial depressions, to account for which so many contradictory and self-contradictory theories are broached. A consideration of the manner in which the speculative advance in land values cuts down the earnings of labor and capital and checks production leads, I think, irresistibly to the conclusion that this is the main cause of those periodical industrial depressions to which every civilized country and all civilized countries together seem increasingly liable. The speculative advance in land values. I do not mean to say that there are not other approximate causes. The growing complexity and interdependence of the machinery of production, which makes each shock or stoppage propagate itself through a widening circle. The essential defect of currencies which contract when most needed. See, this is, I think he was an advocate of fiat currency, as it was called, the greenbacker. He was which means he was wanted to get off of the gold standard. But I haven't read his other writings where he talks more about that, but I will. He continues. And the tremendous alternations in volume that occur in the simpler forms of commercial credit, which to a much greater extent than currency in any form, constitute the medium or flux of exchanges. The protective tariffs which present artificial barriers to the interplay of productive forces and other similar causes undoubtedly bear important part in producing and continuing what are called hard times. But both from the consideration of principles and the observation of phenomena, it is clear that the great initiatory cause is to be looked for in the speculative advance of land values. In the preceding chapter, I have shown that the speculative advance in land values tends to press the margin of cultivation or production beyond its normal limit, thus compelling labor and capital to accept of a smaller return, or, and this is the only way they can resist the tendency, to cease production. Now it is not only natural that labor and land should resist the crowding down of wages and interest by the speculative advance of rent, but they are driven to this in self-defense, inasmuch as there is a minimum of return below which labor cannot exist nor capital be maintained. Hence, from the fact of speculation in land, we may infer all the phenomena which mark these recurring seasons of industrial depression. Given a progressive community in which population is increasing and one improvement succeeds another, and land must constantly increase in value, this steady increase naturally leads to speculation in which future increase is anticipated, and land values are carried beyond the point at which, under the existing conditions of production, their accustomed returns would be left to labor and capital. Production, therefore, begins to stop. Not that there is necessarily or even probably an absolute diminution in production, but that there is what in a progressive community would be equivalent to an absolute diminution of production in a stationary community, a failure in production to increase proportionately, owing to the failure of new increments in labor and capital to find employment at the accustomed rates. So, a quick comment is here it seems like he is simply speaking of, depressions and boom times. What's the proper economic term in contrast to a depression or recession? I don't know, progression, I guess. Um, I wonder, yeah, like there's still something to be said. Like suppose you had a society of eternal beings, and but they all never invented anything either. So you had neither increasing population nor any improvements. Um, I believe George would still have a very strong case to make about the people who somehow owned the land getting uh, rent in an unjust manner. But he is not exactly addressing that. Currently, he is simply talking about the boom and bust cycle. George continues. Yes, the it was titled the paroxysms of industrial depression, or or would the paroxysms be of the progress? A paroxysm is just a kind of, yeah, like, yes, as it's defined here, a sudden increase or occurrence of something as convulsion, which is basically what we mean by a depression. This stoppage of production at some points must necessarily show itself at other points of the industrial network, in a cessation of demand which would again check production there, and thus the paralysis would communicate itself through all the interlacings of industry and commerce, producing everywhere a partial disjointing of production and exchange, and resulting in the phenomena that seem to show overproduction or overconsumption according to the standpoint from which they are viewed. Yes, there's a stoppage of production, and then from certain standpoints, it seems like there's overproduction or overconsumption. The period of depression thus ensuing would continue until 1. The speculative advance in rents had been lost, or 2. The increase in the efficiency of labor owing to the growth of population and the progress of improvement had enabled the normal rent line to overtake the speculative rent line. Or 3. Labor and capital had become reconciled to engaging in production for smaller returns. You just accept the bad hand. Or, most probably, all three of these causes would cooperate to produce a new equilibrium, at which all the forces of production would again engage, and a season of activity ensue. Whereupon, rent would begin to advance again, a speculative advance again take place, production again be checked, and the same round be gone over. Yes, a cycle, you might say. Uh, Currently, there are some Georgists, or Edward Dobson, a Georgist, has been giving some lectures to the Henry George School of Social Sciences discussing the present status of our economy and discussing whether or not we are about to enter a depression in a Georgist lens, of course, and so looking over, you know, do we think that there's just are we reaching a toppling point of just tons of speculation? Uh, and they tend to think we are. I mean, it's no huge shock to think that we're due for another recession since like 2008 was a major one, and then we sort of weathered the pandemic weirdly. I don't know. But those kinds of predictions, especially like if you're trying to be like, oh, it's going to happen in the year 2026. No, it's in the year 2027. No, it's in the year 2028. Uh, I don't place a ton of weight on them. Anyway, Henry George School of Social Sciences, Google it. Edward Dobson, Google it. George continues. In the elaborate and complicated. Okay, I don't think we're going to finish this chapter. Just skipping ahead. Yeah, I'm scrolling back to where I was because I wanted to see how long the chapter was, and it's long. And in the elaborate and complicated system of production which is characteristic of modern civilization, where, moreover, there is no such thing as a distinct and independent industrial community, but geographically or politically separated communities blend and interlace their industrial organizations in different modes and varying measures, it is not to be expected that effect should be seen to follow cause as clearly and definitely as would be the case in a simpler development of industry. Yes, it's going to be hard to see in our complicated world, but it exists, I believe, George claims, and in a community forming a complete and distinct industrial whole. Okay, that was the rest of that sentence I didn't finish. Well, it's not even, the sentence isn't even over. That, my friend, is a semicolon. So George's sentence continues, but nevertheless, the phenomena actually presented by these alternate seasons of activity and depression clearly correspond with those we have inferred from the speculative advance of rent. I I tend to think that with all of the technological progress we have achieved since George's time, we are nearly in a global economy. I mean, I don't think too many people would really argue against that strongly. And sometimes when we talk a lot about Georgism and we talk about our poor, uh, we don't really take we think of like the poor people in our economy as being um, poor American citizens, but I truly consider, you know, our policies as hugely affecting the renter class, the poor unlanded class globally. When you consider how many American companies do so much business overseas and are basically exploiting the land of other countries. Um, like I know I've made the point about, 40% of Americans are renters. They're below George's wedge, and so in some form they're in like, desperate and forced to work under land monopoly. But really, I think America, being the dominant economic force, we should really consider more. There are many, many more who are victims of our extended land monopoly. And then you would have to say it's not simply the U.S. government who is at fault, of course. Many other governments are uh, to blame as well, which means other power structures in other countries. Basically, all uh, have this same form of granting land monopoly to their higher class, which is sobering. George continues, deduction thus shows the actual phenomena as resulting from the principle. If we reverse the process, it is as easy by induction to reach the principle by tracing up the phenomena. Okay, we can reverse the process. These seasons of depression are always preceded by seasons of activity and speculation. Excuse me. And on all hands, the connection between the two is admitted, the depression being looked upon as the reaction from the speculation, as the headache of the morning is the reaction from the debauch of the night. Some things never change. But as to the manner in which the depression results from the speculation, there are two classes or schools of opinion, as the attempts made on both sides of the Atlantic to account for the present industrial depression will show. One school says that the speculation produced the depression by causing overproduction, and points to the warehouses filled with goods that cannot be sold at remunerative prices, to mills closed or working on half time, to mines shutting down and steamers laid up, to money lying idly in bank vaults, and workmen compelled to idleness and privation. They point to these facts as showing that the production has exceeded the demand for consumption, and they point, moreover, to the fact that when government during war enters the field as an enormous consumer, brisk times prevail, as in the United States during the Civil War and in England during the Napoleonic struggle. I don't know much about American the situation in 1879. I suppose there was a depression going on. And then this does, yeah, like this is why there's a lot of Georges who are talking a lot about Steve Gesell and his ideas about um, monopoly of currency. I'm trying to learn more about that, but I have only watched a few little lectures. Um, but I know that Gesell and Keynes, who apparently was heavily influenced by Gesell, they speak a lot of like, oh, the velocity of money, and you just got to make people spend and you got to make them consume, and we can do that by sort of manipulating the currency in these certain ways. And the problem is people letting money sit by idly. And my intuition is just like that is a band-aid. Um, anyway, enough about my. Let's see what the other school says. The other school says that the speculation has produced the depression by leading to overconsumption, and points to full warehouses, rusting steamers, closed mills, and idle workmen as evidences of a cessation of effective demand, which they say evidently results from the fact that people, made extravagant by fictitious prosperity, have lived beyond their means and are now obliged to retrench. Retrench? I would have thought like you say retreat, but or get reduce costs or spending in response to economic difficulty. Yeah, that's a well. George used that word right. That is, to consume less wealth. They point, moreover, to the enormous consumption of wealth by wars, by the building of unremunerative railroads, by loans to bankrupt governments, etc., as extravagances which, though not felt at the time, just as the spendthrift does not at the moment feel the impairment of his fortune, must now be made up by a season of reduced consumption. Now each of these theories evidently expresses one side or phase of a general truth, but each of them evidently fails to comprehend the full truth. As an explanation of the phenomena, each is equally and utterly preposterous. For while the great masses of men want more wealth than they can get, and while they are willing to give for it that which is the basis and raw material of wealth, their labor, how can there be overproduction? And while the machinery of production wastes, and producers are condemned to unwilling idleness, how can there be overconsumption? Now, or when, with the desire to consume more, there coexist the ability and willingness to produce more, industrial and commercial paralysis cannot be charged either to overproduction or to overconsumption. Manifestly, the trouble is that production and consumption cannot meet and satisfy each other. How does this inability arise? It is evidently and by common consent the result of speculation. But of speculation in what? Certainly not of speculation in things which are the products of labor, in agricultural or mineral productions or manufactured goods. For the effect of speculation in such things, as is well shown in current treatises, and spare me the necessity of illustration, is simply to equalize supply and demand, and to steady the interplay of production and consumption by an action analogous to that of a flywheel in a machine. Um, he'll spare you the necessity of illustration. I'll say that, you know, if people are speculating on wheat, then people will produce more wheat until there's suddenly shown less of a demand for wheat, and then they'll produce less wheat, and the price fluctuates. That is because um, the both the supply and demand of wheat is elastic. We can make more or less wheat, and the amount of wheat we need to eat, or not eat, just consume or want, can go up or down. There are other things we can choose over. The amount of wheat each person consumes is not absolutely fixed. George continues. Therefore, if speculation be the cause of these industrial depressions, it must be speculation in things not the production of labor, but yet necessary to the exertion of labor in the production of wealth, of things of fixed quantity. That is to say, it must be speculation in land. That land speculation is the true cause of industrial depression is, in the United States, clearly evident. In each period of industrial activity, land values have steadily risen, culminating in speculation, which carried them up in great jumps. Oh yeah, I want to say this one little bit. Sometimes when you're trying to persuade people of Georgism and of land, they might say like, "What do you mean? Land is just some sort of financial asset, just like anything else, because like there's risk. You invest in it, and it definitely, it could go down, and so it's not like you're guaranteed just to make a ton of money if you own land." They say, and they're right. When you're like purely speculating, there could be a big risk, or there is a big risk, right? If you buy a bunch of land right before there is a crash, you could lose a bunch. And that that doesn't mean that land is then suddenly the same as all other kinds of investments, or that it is falls in the category of capital. Um, it just means that land speculation does involve risk. Uh, all right, George continues. This has been culminating speculation which carried them up in great jumps. This has been invariably followed by a partial cessation of production and its correlative, a cessation of effective demand, dull trade, generally accompanied by a commercial crash, and then has succeeded a period of comparative stagnation, during which the equilibrium has been again slowly established and the same round been run again. This relation is observable throughout the civilized world. Periods of industrial activity always culminate in a speculative advance of land values, followed by symptoms of checked production, generally shown at first by cessation of demand from the newer countries, where the advance in land value has been greatest. That this must be the main explanation of these periods of depression will be seen by an analysis of the facts. All right, that's where we'll stop today. One final comment. I don't know where the graph is that I've seen around of how frequently there were boom and busts in 1800s and early 1900s, like pre the Federal Reserve. But they were sharper. Essentially, there were more. They were worse depressions, but bigger periods of progression. But the average sort of growth uh, sort of remained the same even after, like, okay. So George is writing a time when there's lots of recessions and depressions and then big periods of progression. Since then, the Federal Reserve seems to have come around and sort of blunted both ends. At least this is the claim I make and George's make. I think, I don't know, yeah. Has blunted both recessions and periods of progression, through the manipulation of the currency and by printing currency and by lending it at different interest rates. Um, and this sort of seems to maybe give them some kind of validity as understanding the economy and saving us, and like, oh, if only the Fed could just play the game just right, we would just have this continuous smooth prosperity. Uh, Yet it seems to me, also from looking at some of those graphs, that the overall growth of the economy has remained at kind of a constant rate. Just because the recessions aren't as bad, like, I mean, maybe I would agree that it's better to have recessions that aren't as bad in exchange for having booms that aren't as big, but like the net progression is still retarded by land monopoly. And the fact that the Fed exists just creates more bureaucracy and more um, of an entrenched system of governance. Of course, I present this to you with no data whatsoever. See you next time. Alright, we are now in Book 5, Chapter 1. I read Book 5. Oh, wait, where do we live? This is where we left off. The problem solved. The primary cause of recurring. Okay. George says, um, Oh yeah. George says speculation in land is the dominant cause of depressions. He says everyone agrees. George says everyone agrees speculation causes the depressions, while some say speculation, but they point, but the speculation in what? In land. You know what we haven't been doing is writing our progress and poverty précis. Book 5, the problem solved. Whoa, why did it? Chapter 1. Hmm. Um, there are many different causes of depression, but land speculation is the mother of all. Increasing population and invention can stave off. I don't know. Can fuel such speculation. It continues. There's 3 ways to get out of a depression. 1, I don't quite understand this. Speculative have been lost. Not sure what this means. Increase in efficiency of labor, population, or tech. Um, Labor and capital accept lower returns. Probably all 3 together normally do the trick. It's easier to see uh, the effect of land speculation in simpler societies. The fact that industries are dispersed among many countries complicates many industries dispersed, not disperse. Disburse is when you give the money, and disperse is when you separate. Dispersura. One school says speculation caused overproduction. Another school, everyone agrees speculation causes depressions. Says speculation caused overconsumption. George says speculating in elastic goods just moves the supply-demand curve. George says land is a fixed quantity. Speculating in land causes depression. Alright, let's go back to book 4. There's chapter 3. Yes. The effect of improvements in the arts upon the distribution of wealth. Well, we could look at our summary. Humans want more wealth as soon as their previous desires are met. Wealth is interchangeable. Any labor saving, any improvement to wealth production of one kind enables more of another. Eventually, it increases demand for more. Is that all I want to say about this? It will be to increase the production of wealth. It is important to do it. Thus, where land is entirely appropriated. often extends the margin of cultivation. Remember, this is enabled by exchange and specialization of labor, or we'll call it division of labor. Consider how food, how the wealth voted to food can scale. King versus pauper.
Have some fun. Real fun. Not like 37-year-old woman on a blind date fun.
Oh, this is fun, right? We're having fun. I mean, so what if you forgot your wallet? I'll pay. I'm gonna pay for us. You'll get it next time, yeah. So you were in prison, right? Killed a man? Oh, I'm sure it was in self-defense.
No, I just felt like killing.
Oh, you tell the best stories. Me and my 3 eggs are having the best time.
George writes in italics. George works through an example of margin of cultivation being 20, then labor saving, then new tech. Of new tech affecting, yes, with the A, the margin of cultivation from 20 to 18. Depending on and depending. Alright. Chapter IV. The effect of progress raised. Expectations. This was what I read yesterday. Since population and tech cause rent to go up, there is land speculation. This is seen in all progressing civilizations. Illustrated again with the margin of cultivation being 20, speculators come in. Speculation is only limited. Speculation is limited by uh, a minimum wage of consent to reproduction. Countries where wages are super low will have less speculation. Um, Countries with regular progress will have seasons of paralysis. Will have boom bust cycles. Cool. Seems that discernment is both a blessing and a curse and keeps us away from spoiled foods, but also refined healthy foods. Well, not everyone's palate would advance specifically for food as major new. Yeah, I agree. Did you notice the video processing was on the previous screen you just closed? Yeah, I saw it. Oh, I don't know. Yeah. Okay. All right.